So when I wrote this one originally, it actually was, we didn't have nearly as many other lectures, and when I was flipping through it again just now, I noticed it's really long. So I'm going to try to keep it to the important points so we don't all get bored out of our minds. And also because we have actually a board game that we're going to play to reinforce how the Grandpa protocol works. So I am going to do some theory about Finality and maybe look at some other Finality gadgets like Tendermint. But the main thing that we're going to take away, the main practical thing we're going to take here is how Grandpa works. And Grandpa is the Finality gadget used in Polkadot. So a lot of people in the ecosystem know that Grandpa is the thing that provides finality. It's what finalizes blocks. They might also know that there's this thing of like Grandpa votes. And then after that, the knowledge kind of gets sparse pretty quickly. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to actually dig deep into the rules of the game, of the Grandpa protocol, and practice playing it out on a whiteboard so that we can actually learn what the Grandpa voters are doing, when they vote, what the rules are, and we can actually see with our own eyes how blocks get finalized. Now, the game, it's kind of, there's a lot of rules, right? It's complex, so it'll take some time, but it's actually also pretty fun because you're standing there with your colleagues and kind of puzzling through the rules and reading through the instructions as if it's a board game and whatnot. Yeah. So let's get started with the finality theory, and then we can all puzzle through Grandpa together when we get there. So Andrew told you the other day, consensus is a decision-making process that strives to achieve acceptance of some decision by all participants. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone in the group is going to like the decision, but it does mean that everybody is going to acknowledge the legitimacy of the decision as the group's final choice. So this is also a slide that you've already seen. There's these 5 aspects of blockchain consensus, and we've been through the one about how you can't have invalid state transitions. We've talked about how there might be arbitrary political rules, like no blocks bigger than 1 megabyte. We talked about how we can't just have any person who feels like it author a block anytime they feel like, because that would be chaos. We'd have blocks everywhere. So instead, we do some kind of leader election to throttle the authoring, something like proof of work or like Aura or Babe or something like that. And then we've also talked about plenty of fork choice heuristics like the longest chain or the heaviest chain or the most Alice blocks or something like that. And so today we're going to put the final piece in place, and the final piece is finality. So what finality is basically going to do is give us a notion of when and how likely it is that a block might be reverted. So in the POW case, the proof of work case, we only get probabilistic finality. As we've talked about many times, in proof of work, you never actually know that a block won't be reverted. You only know that it's less and less likely as the chain on top of it gets longer and longer. But there's a whole other class of finality gadgets that provide a thing called deterministic finality. And deterministic finality means that by simply watching messages in the protocol and writing them down, you can do mathematical proofs to know that a block will never be reverted. And there were the air quotes around never, because there's always some footnote, right? So every one of our deterministic finality gadgets has some assumptions, and as long as those assumptions are met, then the protocol will thrive. And we'll dig into the details, but it basically the usual assumption is that you have at least 2/3 of the participants honest. So I talked, like maybe in my first lecture, one of them, about how we want our systems to guarantee a particular kind of behavior, and we want to know that our systems are going to behave correctly, even if some of the decentralized actors in those systems are cheating or not behaving correctly. And so if you use that 2/3 threshold example I gave you, you can imagine that maybe we're all validators in some kind of deterministic finality protocol, and a few of us, maybe me and her and him, are evil. Well, that's okay as long as we're below the 2/3 threshold. And so these are the kind of guarantees that we're going to try to get with finality here, okay? And there's probably going to be a lot of times when I, through this lecture, and other people that you just encounter in your life will say something like, that block is final, so it can't be reverted. And that's totally fine. It's a normal thing to say. And I just want you to always have this little tiny voice in the back of your mind, this little sarcastic person back there that says, you mean as long as all of the assumptions are satisfied. So just don't quite forget that. Okay, so let's dive into it. Yeah, just as a reminder, we're working in adversarial conditions here, so the participants do want to agree on something, but they don't trust each other, and it could be the case that some of them are just like incompetent or have bad power supplies or have bugs or are faulty in some way, but it actually could also be quite a bit worse than that. It could be that some of them are straight up malicious. Like, not just they go offline and don't answer, they actually tell you lies on purpose or like try to fake data or something. So these are basically the conditions we've been working in this whole module, but just always good to remind. So I want to start with a relatively simpler problem than the one that we're solving in blockchain. And the simpler problem is called one-shot consensus. That's when you have to decide a specific thing, and once you've decided it, then you're done and you go your own way and the game's over forever. And when you're playing one of these one-shot consensus games, there's these 3 properties that we want. Yeah, another slide with definitions, right? So one of them is called termination, which means this game isn't going to last forever. If we're trying to decide what courses to take next semester in our college degree, we will eventually decide and then get on with the semester. This game isn't going to go on and on and on and never get around to having the semester. Okay, so it's not going to take forever. That's termination. Agreement means that we're all going to reach the same decision. That's obviously the whole goal, right? If I propose some kind of like Finality gadget and we all play this game and then we leave and we're feeling really good, like, hey, we did it, we finalized something. But then it turns out we don't actually all agree on the thing we finalized. That would be pretty useless. Okay, so far we've said we want to be sure this game ends and finalizes something eventually. We want to be sure we all agree on the thing that was finalized. And the almost last one here is integrity, which says we'll reach at most one decision, which was proposed by at least one participant. So we won't have 2 different decisions or more. And we also won't reach a decision that nobody proposed. So if we're trying to make a collective dinner about, a collective decision about like what time we want to have dinner, and like, let's say I say, hey, let's do it at 5 o'clock. And then, that person's like, nah, let's do it at 7 o'clock. And then someone else is like, let's do it at 8 o'clock. And then we play this game. And we're never going to decide that we should have dinner at like 1 o'clock or something that none of us proposed. So integrity just means that some people won't get their way. That's going to be the case whenever you have to make a collective decision. But at least somebody should. We shouldn't have a decision that nobody actually wanted or even threw into the hat. And then there's this other 4th one that's called validity, and I put it on a separate slide because it's kind of so trivial you almost don't have to think about it. But if all participants actually propose the same thing on the first round, if there actually isn't any dissonance at all, then that's the decision that we should reach. So if you have a Finality gadget that like somehow doesn't do that, then this is sort of then it's probably not a very good Finality gadget. Okay, so let's get concrete. Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman are all trying to decide where to have dinner. And Stan, Kyle, and Kenny, they want to have something yummy and spend some time bonding together. But Cartman is secretly pursuing his own goals. He actually doesn't really care whether dinner's yummy. In fact, he sort of secretly hopes they won't decide at all so he can go home and eat KFC with his mom. So Stan and Kyle both propose this place called Whistle and Willie's for dinner. And Kenny and Cartman both propose Casa Bonita. And in the end, Kenny might not agree that Whistle and Willie's is actually the best option for dinner, but at least he will agree that that is the legitimate decision of the group, and he'll be able to acknowledge that and go have dinner, have some yummy dinner, and have a good time. So if you remember, Kenny and Cartman both proposed Casa Bonita, so why am I only saying that in the end Kenny will agree that Whistle and Willie's is the decision of the group? Why won't Cartman also agree to that necessarily? Did anyone see it? Is this maybe a subtlety? Let's go back and look at our properties. Oh, actually, maybe I didn't even say it on here. Okay, so the thing that you got it.
He didn't propose it.
Okay, it's true that he didn't propose it. Neither did Kenny. What I didn't say, I thought I put on the slide, is that these properties apply to the agreement, applies to all of the honest participants. So what the consensus protocol guarantees is that all of the honest participants who did follow the protocol will have these properties and validity. So this agreement, we say they'll all reach the same decision. Well, if you're just some node who's not even following the protocol, you can reach whatever decision you want. But if you follow the protocol properly, then the rules will convene you to reaching all this same decision. Okay, so that's satisfied for all of the honest players. So just to like apply each of our conditions to this scenario, we can say that Stan, Kyle, and Kenny will each eventually decide where to eat. This game will terminate. We can also say that they'll decide to eat at the same place. That's the agreement property. And then finally, we'll say that they're either going to eat at Casa Bonita or Whistle and Willie's, because those were the only proposals. They're not going to end up going to McDonald's that nobody even proposed in the first place. But we don't have any of these guarantees about Cartman because he's behaving dishonestly or not following the protocol here. All right, so we talked a little bit about how there's this one level of fault tolerance where you can handle nodes that go offline or sort of stop doing their job. That's typically called crash tolerance. And then there's a stronger notion of misbehaving nodes that we need to deal with, which is called Byzantine fault tolerance. And so these Byzantine nodes, of course they can crash like other nodes could, but they can also lie and equivocate, like I said here. And so this is a sort of a stronger adversarial environment, and the Finality gadgets that I'm going to describe operate successfully even in these Byzantine scenarios. And in fact, that's what we need, because when you're dealing with a blockchain, you have adversaries out there who want to do anything they can to either stall it or revert a finalized block or trick people in some way. And so they're, of course, not going to like say, oh, it's inappropriate to lie. Let me just try to go offline at the right time for my attack. They're going to do whatever it takes. And this next slide, does anybody know what this is on the screen, actually? What is that thing? Yep, it's an airplane. This is the bottom of the wing. And what's this thing? This is the airspeed sensor. It's called a pitot tube. And the way that it works, so the airplane flies this way, and there's this little hole in it right here. That's called the static port, and it measures the static air pressure of the air that's outside. And then on the front, there's another hole, and that's called the ram pressure port, and it measures the ram air pressure, the one that's flying into. And so, you can imagine like, oh, we have a bunch of air rushing in here. It's pretty high pressure. There's not as much pressure over here, and from that difference, we can infer how fast we're flying. But what's wrong with this one? It's got ice over it. Yeah, when you fly through clouds at 35,000 feet, you can pick up a lot of ice. And if that hole up front ices over, then you're not going to get any ram air, and this thing isn't going to tell you the correct airspeed anymore. So would you say this is like a category of the malicious kind, the lying and cheating kind, or would you say this is more of the like mistake kind, like the node going offline kind? Buggy is the right word. A lot of people said mistake. Intuitively, it seems like a mistake, right? No evil person went and put that ice there. It just formed. But in terms of a Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus protocol, this is actually like lying, because this instrument is going to tell you an airspeed that's not the real airspeed you're flying. And so the point of this slide is to emphasize that you can have things like safety violations or problems in your consensus layer, and it's not always because there's an evil human out there trying to execute attack. It could be because there's bugs in your code. Your node might accidentally break the protocol because your code wasn't quite right, even if you weren't trying to attack. I think that's how some of the biggest slashes in Kusama's history have happened, because of bugs in the protocol. So just a subtlety to keep in mind here. Okay, so here's the Byzantine generals problem. You may have seen it at some point. And this is a link, too, for those of you flipping through. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Before I start, that's a good time.
Do they still get slashed?
Yeah, yep.
Even though it's just about...
Feels bad in your heart, doesn't it?
Yes.
But when I execute my attack, and I tell you it was because it was a bug, you don't really know, right? Maybe I made that bug on purpose to try to attack. Or honestly, even if it was a bug, we still had the system go down. So now I will say, in change with governance, sometimes people can do something about this. So like Kusama has governance, and then, I mean, the slash for sure happens, right? The state machine says it has to happen, it has to happen. But sometimes you can use governance to like reverse it or give money back or something like that. But this is one of the risks of running like a validator node. It's not only like I have to be a good human who intends to do good, you also need to make sure that your node software is up to date and your operating system is patched so that you don't like accidentally lie without meaning to. Okay, so here's a framing of the Byzantine generals problem, and this is basically just a like cute story way to summarize the class of problems of like distributed decision making, I guess. So the way that it works is that there's all these like divisions of the Byzantine army surrounding a city. And what they want to do is attack the city in the middle, and the generals have kind of made some calculations, and they've decided that if they all perform a coordinated attack, it's pretty likely that they might be able to take the city. But if they do some kind of uncoordinated thing where this division comes in first and then that one comes in later, they'll probably lose the attack and lose a lot of forces, and it would be wasteful. So what they need to do is somehow coordinate together to attack all at the same time. But all they can do, they're all around this giant city. It's not like they can just sit around and have a chat like this. So they just have to send message carriers between each other. And so their goal is to basically come up with a certain time when they want to attack. So the proposal, or that problem, was proposed by Leslie Lamport, who's like one of the most OG distributed consensus researchers. Predates blockchain by a lot, and it's like well worth reading anything that you can by Lamport. But the good news is that although he didn't solve it, somebody solved this Byzantine generals problem. And it turns out that in at least a lot of cases, there are real practical solutions so that we can all agree and attack at the same time. Or to use the blockchain example where we're not attacking, we can all agree and finalize the same blocks at the same time, and then not have to worry about having these deep reorgs. I guess I didn't really motivate why we want finality. Maybe it's clear from all the talks of reorgs that we've done, but basically, if you can finalize a block, you don't have to keep all of the old blocks and states and everything before that to worry about reorgs. Those of you who are doing the assignment after this lecture will probably be wishing that maybe Bonecoin had some deterministic finality so that you could just keep like the last 10 blocks or something like that. So this is exactly why finality is nice. So this paper is called, oh yeah, it's right there, Practical Byzantine Fault Tolerance. It's worth a read. It's a classic one, if you're the paper reading kind. So let me just give you a little sort of brief history of the space here. So I'm going to sort of categorize networks into one of two categories, and then we can describe the systems that operate on those networks, and then I'll bring you to this big, interesting research result. So when I talk about a network, I want to classify it into either synchronous or asynchronous. And so a synchronous network is one where if I broadcast a message, you all receive it immediately in its completion. And so if I broadcast two messages, it's true for both of them, and therefore you also receive them in order. And so there's no chance of something like I send a message and then Alice sends a message, but you get Alice's message first and then you get mine. So synchronous networks are quite a bit easier when you're trying to design protocols. You don't have to worry about all these weird edge cases about like, oh, what if my message didn't arrive, or what if it didn't arrive in time or in order or something like that. Now, obviously, that's not the most realistic way to describe like the modern internet, for example. And so asynchronous is a better model there. And that's when a message is sent, it may be received after some delay, or it might not be received at all, and the sender doesn't even know whether it was received. All they know is they sent it, and hopefully it gets received at some point. And yeah, and by the way, if they're broadcasts, like maybe I'm sending it to all of you guys, and maybe people on this side get message 1, then 2, and people over here get message 2, then 1. So this is quite a bit more complicated to like build a protocol in. And then I'll just introduce this third sort of partway one, which is partially synchronous, which is to say we still basically treat it as synchronous, but here's what I'm trying to get at. We use this term because it's a much more realistic model of the real internet than simple synchronicity. We say when a message is sent, it may be received after some delay and up to a maximum delay t. It can't be dropped entirely. They can be reordered and received in different orders by different people. So it sounds a lot like asynchronous. The only guarantee that we're adding is that every message eventually will arrive. Okay? And what that does is it allows us to have, like, especially for big values of t, a fairly realistic model of the real internet, but actually restore most of the properties that make it easy to make mathematical proofs that we get from a synchronous network. So, okay, I'll just go through maybe a few of these examples. If I call you up on the telephone, oh yeah, I always poke at Andrew. I say he's my only friend my age who calls me on the phone on a regular basis, whereas most people would like text. And so I think that texting versus calling is a perfect example of synchronous versus asynchronous. Because if I call you on the phone and say, hey, what's up? I'm basically going to sit there and do nothing else until I hear you say like, oh, nothing, I'm good, or like, hey, call me back later, or whatever. But with like a text, or especially with something like old school physical mail, if I were to like write you a letter and mail it, I'm not going to just sit there at my mailbox until I get your letter back. That's going to be days later, right? So mail communication is a good example of how asynchronous networking works. I send the letter off, the post person takes it, maybe I'll never hear back. I don't even know if it made it. Maybe the post person crashed, but hopefully they made it. Okay, so that's how I want to classify networks, synchronous or asynchronous. And then I also want to classify determinism of systems. So deterministic systems basically is like a deterministic function. If you give the same inputs, the same outputs happen every time. And that's to, what's the word? To contrast with probabilistic system, which is where I might give the same inputs, but I might not get the same output every time. And these probabilistic or non-deterministic systems have this classic property that like they have some randomness in them. So if you want to think of a simple deterministic function, think of one that takes in two integers, adds them together, and gives you back the sum. And a simple probabilistic function is one that takes in two integers, rolls some dice, adds up your two integers and whatever's on the dice, and gives back the result. So with this one, I can give it the same two integers every time, but the dice might not come out the same way. And the reason that I'm talking about this weird distinction now is because it actually turns out that adding randomness into your consensus protocol can solve a whole lot of problems. So this is the famous result called FLP impossibility. And it's not an acronym you need to remember, it's just authors. I think it's Fisher Lynch Patterson or something, but it's not like a vocab thing to remember. And so their famous result is that if you have an asynchronous network, like the real internet, and you want a deterministic protocol that guarantees the same results every time, can't be done. That's what they proved. Not possible. And I don't know the proof. You got to read the paper for that. What was that? We'll get the mic for that. So he's saying that this is for traditional BFT protocols. So this is for BFT protocols, but I don't know much about Avalanche, so I won't speak on your term of or domain of expertise. But it definitely applies even to things all the way to like proof of work and et cetera. So this is what we wanted because it's our real networking conditions and the simplest kinds of protocols that we can expect. And these guys proved that it can't be done, at least in the most obvious ways, I guess. Maybe there's a footnote that I'm not familiar with. And so this basically like took the distributed consensus community and kind of split it in half. On the one half, you had people who said like, okay, well, we really care about modeling the real internet, so let's at least try to like get something that works over here. And there are some pretty good protocols that you can build. And then there were other people who said like, okay, well, we really care about these nice deterministic protocols, so let's see if we can at least get them to work in a synchronous network. And it turned out that worked too. So both of the forks were able to have success. And pretty much for the whole like history of the field, everybody focused on this, and then once it was impossible, they went to one or the other. And then all of a sudden in 2009, or 8 actually, this like random paper from this random anon comes out, Satoshi Nakamoto, and introduces a different version of distributed consensus called Nakamoto consensus. And it does the weirdest thing that no one ever thought of, which is to actually give up on both of those goals, to come up with it's a probabilistic consensus method, and it only works in a synchronous network. Or, remember, partially synchronous also counts. Question in the back.
Yeah, Marisha. So my question is, can you kind of reiterate on the system? Like, you want the system to be deterministic in terms of what, and also like synchronous in terms of message passing.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to understand.
Yeah, I'm saying like, can you reiterate on the explanation of FLP impossibility, as in our system need to be deterministic on what and asynchronous on what?
Okay, so asynchronous versus synchronous just categorizes like the communication channel over which we're playing this game. So if we're gonna like the South Park guys were deciding to go to dinner, right? If I'm calling you up on the phone, then that's like a synchronous network in which we're making this decision. But if I'm like, texting you and then going to like wash my hands and then texting you and then like, I don't know, taking a nap, then that would be asynchronous. So that has only to do with like the environment in which you're communicating.
And the deterministic part and the probabilistic part plays where?
Yeah, and so deterministic versus probabilistic says, the probabilistic consensus mechanisms somewhere in the game requires some participant to flip a coin or roll a die or something like that. Somebody in the consensus system has to have some source of entropy in order to make the thing work. That's like the main characteristic of the probabilistic column.
So okay. In the example of the game, right? Maybe asynchronous, right? Like I text someone, then he takes time to reply or doesn't reply. But also like deterministic, like the holy grail, it is impossible to achieve. So you mean what you mean is like how does those two parts, deterministic and asynchronous, conjoin? Like for
Yeah, oh
example,
yeah, like why are they related? They seem so unrelated, you mean? Is that what
yeah,
you're getting at?
yeah. Like which part? Okay, for example, an example whereby those two can't meet and like explain like okay, for example, this example, it can't have deterministic part and it can't also have asynchronous part. Like an example of that, for example.
You were asking me for an example of,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
what?
that, yeah.
An example of what?
Of a system or a game whereby like if we try to have deterministic and asynchronous message passing, it cannot like we prove that it is impossible
Yeah,
to
yeah.
achieve.
I can't recount the proof right now. I'm really sorry. I wish I could. I'm a little, getting to the limits of my depth here. I just know that this is what the paper proved. I can't really like
Okay.
walk you through it.
Okay.
I would be down to read it. Well, yeah, but you guys aren't gonna have time to read a paper like that while you're here. But okay, I have not answered that question. Okay,
Yeah.
but I don't think I can. So yeah, great question though. Yeah, right in front of you.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. Right here.
Oh, okay. Just another question. So when we talk about deterministic state machines, do we
Yeah.
mean the deterministic in terms of consensus, finality,
Okay, so that is another example of where we use the exact same term, deterministic and probabilistic. So a deterministic state machine that's the kind we always have on the blockchain, right? Like you have some pre-state, you put in some transaction, everybody gets the same post state. Like if they weren't deterministic, nodes wouldn't even agree on the post state. But it is totally possible to have a probabilistic state machine where we have some pre-state, we put in some transaction, and it gives output A. And then tomorrow, we come to the same pre-state, we give it the same transaction, and it gives output B. Those are real state machines like that, but they're not the ones that are useful for blockchain. So, yeah, great.
Excuse me.
Okay.
So, having worked extensively with deterministic and probabilistic together, so I wasn't able to comprehend asynchronous and synchronous there with both of them. But if you apply Bayesian, the whole field of machine learning is based on deterministic and probabilistic. So it means at that probability, you are determining the fact that it is going to happen like that, right? So I didn't get the idea of like what is asynchronous in this case, like in email or something.
Yeah, I mean, I did synchronous versus asynchronous twice, right? Synchronous means the moment I send a message, you immediately get it, like when I talk on the phone and you hear it. Asynchronous means you might get my message later or never, like when I mail you a letter. And I go on and do other things in the meantime. It's not a property of the consensus protocol itself. These are properties of the consensus protocol itself. These are properties of the network on which we're operating.
Okay, so network could be
The internet. When we
internet,
do it
right?
with blockchain, we're doing it on the internet.
So
The internet
if
is
it's
asynchronous.
a socket connection. Like I
Sure.
know is right. Like please give me like 1 minute so that I understand this properly. And if you want, I can ask you offline.
Okay, go one more.
So if it's a socket connection, right? Like HTTP is stateless, right? So I'm now going a little bit technical, but let's say. So if it's
Deep into another area that I'm not
if it's a
as
socket connection, right? Like it's not guaranteed it will reach. It can
It's not
break.
what?
It's not guaranteed on the internet it will break like a UDP socket.
Yeah, it can be exactly. It can break. Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
So same thing, asynchronous, all HTTPS communication is usually asynchronous, right?
Yeah.
The connections made, blah, 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 and stuff like that, right?
Yes,
The
that's
protocols.
right.
But they are deterministic, so they make sure they reach. Otherwise, internet's not possible. Like you will
You're not
connect.
describing a consensus protocol right now, right? You're talking about HTTP.
Yes.
Okay.
Network. Asynchronous network and synchronous network.
let's try to relate this to
So
things
maybe
at the
I'm getting
HTTP
confused and
level
I'll bug
later.
you later, right?
Okay,
So I don't
cool.
wanna-
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Yeah, okay. So we talked about one-shot consensus when you have to make a decision, a single decision, one time. What we want to do usually with blockchain is ongoing consensus. We don't want to decide this is the state, now we know, end of story, see you later. What we want to do is we say, this is the state right now, we've agreed, let's try to get another block worth of state finalized later, and then another block worth finalized later. And so in these like recurring or ongoing consensus games, we state the desirable properties like this. Safety, this is sort of the like traditional BFT literature word, and this is more of the blockchain-y word. They're nearly synonyms. At an abstract level, they guarantee that nothing bad will happen. Or in the case of blockchain, they guarantee that no block that was finalized will ever be unfinalized. Did anybody have that little annoying person say, unless the assumptions are violated? And then we have liveness, which says that in an abstract sense, something good will eventually happen, or in a blockchain-y context, will eventually finalize some other block. So let me ask you this question. Previously, I said that termination was a desirable property. Now I'm saying that liveness is a desirable property. Aren't those kind of at odds with each other? Do we want it to end, or do we want it to keep going? Are they compatible? So, to restate,
Depends how much time are you willing to wait for things. What do you consider liveness? So how much time must pass that you consider is not live anymore? Like 1 second, half second, 3 seconds. So how much you tolerate in latency and somehow.
okay, yeah, that's a great thing to think about. As a sort of practical computer sciencey person, I have that same model where I like to think of liveness as like a real number. How live is it? You know, how soon can I expect the next block? In the formal literature, liveness only means eventually. No guarantee. Maybe an hour, maybe a year, maybe a week, you know, but eventually. So, yeah. So oh yeah, did you want to say something over there? Or where's that mic going?
No, I'm just trying to answer your question. So is
Okay.
it the termination of that particular block and then is the continuous consensus thing, right? So the liveliness is more for the continuous thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So termination is the property we want for one single decision. So in the blockchain context, that we can say, I hope to eventually finalize a block at height 80. And based on the one-shot decision, we know that that will eventually terminate. We'll eventually finalize something at height 80. But liveness says that we'll then go on to do another one, to go on to height 81 and 82. And so that's the difference between like a one-shot consensus versus the ongoing consensus game. We're basically going to play consensus multiple times here. And just to foreshadow a little bit, the more naive way to do ongoing consensus is just to have round after round after round of one-shot consensus. But actually, you can be a little bit more clever than that, and that's what Grandpa does, and that's what we'll dive into really soon. Oh yeah, whoops, I had a whole slide for that. So I'm going to skip all the Nakamoto consensus stuff because I think we've done that enough. Okay, I've said this, so this deterministic finality stuff, this is based on the classic literature. This is going back to pre-Bitcoin and saying, hey, we already had a whole lot of good consensus ideas before Bitcoin came out. Can we somehow apply those to this whole blockchain data structure on a P2P network thing that Bitcoin invented and just sort of replace the proof of work with something like this? And as I mentioned before, there's this requirement of some kind of like honest majority, or usually it's honest 2/3 majority and finite authority set. So I would say this is one of the biggest weaknesses compared to Nakamoto consensus. In Nakamoto consensus, anyone can join or leave at any time, totally anonymously, and you don't even know if someone's joined until they've successfully mined a block. They don't even have to dox themselves as like, hey, I'm playing now, nice to meet you. They can just privately mine and only tell you they're mining once they get a block. But with Grandpa or Tendermint or any of these other BFT-based ones, you actually have to know who your authorities are in advance, and there has to be a finite set of them. So that kind of hurts decentralization, at least on the surface, and so we need some kind of like economic game to fairly elect a like representative decentralized authority set. And so this is where some of the complexities of proof of stake come in. Oh yeah, right. So let me just say that again. The consensus protocol itself assumes that we have an honest majority. In blockchain, we're never just going to assume there's an honest majority. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use game theory to incentivize them to be honest, because they know that being honest is the best way to look out for themselves and optimize their own utility. Yeah, great. Say the same thing again. So we're basically going to do that the same way we always have, by rewarding the honest players and punishing or slashing the dishonest ones. Or at least one of these. Sometimes one is enough, but a lot of times both. So just to like zoom in on what happens in these systems, like here's some things that are maybe worthy of a slash or something that you might want to publish. Authoring when it's not your turn. So if this is Babe and I have my VRF output and it's not low enough and I go ahead and author anyway, that would be an example of something that might be punishable. Now in Polkadot, that specific thing is not punished, but it could be, and in other chains it is. This one is a little bit worse, failing to author when you're supposed to author. See, this one's not so bad because people can just reject your block, as long as you're not spamming them so much. This one's a little worse. This affects the liveness of the chain. It gives up some of the opportunities to produce and sell block space. If you skip your slot, that's one block worth of block space that didn't get sold into the fee market. This is a really bad one, participating in your Finality gadget, casting votes for conflicting blocks. This would be Cartman voting that he wants to go to Casa Bonita and that he wants to go to Whistling Willie's. And this is where it really starts to get scary, because if more than a third of the people do stuff like this, that's when your guarantees about finality can actually start to break down. And so the idea is that if you see someone doing that, you have to slash them. You have to end them so that they experience the cost before they're successful. And you might think that okay, well, if it's just one or two people doing this, we still have plenty of room before the threshold. Why do we need to nix it right away? And the idea is that we don't want these people to be able to continue attacking the chain over and over and over again until they happen to get lucky enough and get successful. What we want to do is make sure that they run out of money well before they're likely to be successful. Okay, and here's another example. Obviously, if you vote for a block that's already invalidated at a prior layer of the consensus onion, then that would also be slashable. Oh, right, and so this is something also that maybe Jonas was talking about. Not all of these things are as bad as each other. And it's also the case that one person equivocating or breaking the rules isn't as bad as 10 people doing it together. And so in Polkadot in particular, if we see a person equivocating, we give them a little slash. But if we see 10 people equivocating at once, we give them all a bigger slash. Because when they're coordinating, when one person does it, it might be a mistake. When they're coordinating, it's closer to working and might be a focused effort, and so they need to pay more for it. I saw Boda first, and then I'll get over here. Throw that mic back. Yeah. Nice throw.
Isn't casting finality votes for conflicting blocks is what we need, right?
Not for conflicting. Conflicting means different forks, incompatible blocks. Well, maybe, what was your question?
Yeah. I mean, if we have forks, we need them to be one, right?
We want to pick one or the other of them.
We want to pick one.
Right.
So we cast finality votes
Right.
to pick one.
Right.
So why this is punishable?
So it's not voting at all. What's bad is if there's a fork and there's A and B and you're in the consensus game and you vote for A and also vote for B. That's what you can't do. You have to vote for one or the other. It might be that you vote for A and I vote for B. That's okay. That's the game. We're working out our difference of opinion. But if you're voting on both sides, you get slashed.
I misunderstood.
Over here. And then Ratio, you're next.
When you say you get slashed or we slash people, is the consensus mechanism automating the slashing or individual nodes slashing other nodes?
Yeah, great question. So I shouldn't say we, that's just sloppy, but you get slashed is a better way to do it. And what happens, the way that it works is that, let's say Boda is over here equivocating, sending conflicting votes, and you see it. You saw both of his votes. So what you do is you submit a transaction to the blockchain, and it contains both of his votes. So that proves he did it, right? Here's the undisputable evidence that he equivocated. And then once you've submitted a transaction, now we're in the state machine. And so the state machine has some pre-state that he has such and such a staked balance. You send in a transaction. The post-state is that he now has a lot less staked balance. And I think it goes to the treasury or something like that. Great question. Is this a follow-up? Did you have a question? Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm just how does she see how does hers happen to see the two transactions and then send that?
Yeah, so first a little technicality. His votes aren't transactions, they're off-chain. But the way so what I mean when I say she sees it, I'm assuming she has a node running, and all of the nodes are listening to each other, gossiping votes and recording the votes. And so at some point, she sees his first vote, and she's like, okay, vote is voting here, and then the other one comes in, and she's like, all right, wait a second.
Validating
And then,
it's not valid.
yes, exactly. And then the node software automatically submits the transaction that reports it. And, it's very system to system, but it's pretty common that you actually get a small reward for ratting someone out like that. So yeah, watch out, Boda, she's coming. I saw the excitement there.
Yeah. So the last one, casting a finality vote for a block or chain that includes an invalid state transition.
Yeah.
But then, should that be handled before any votes or something like?
Yeah,
an invalid
exactly.
state transition?
Yeah, it should be. And if it wasn't, that means you're up to something weird.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Honest nodes handle that way earlier, way before we get to Grandpa. Okay, last one, then I'm going on.
So like two small questions. This Polkadot / downtime.
Like
Yeah.
this thing?
I guess that's it, right?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think
Okay.
so.
Cool. Yeah, because I've noticed that there's some blockchains that do / downtime, and to me it seems pretty silly, right? Because at any point in time there could be a disaster, and probably half of nodes could get downtime, right? Most of them are centralized in the U.S., so.
Yeah, on the other hand, you can say that if you do / for downtime, it incentivizes the operator to make sure that they don't have that kind of time. So if they're centralized in the US, maybe they should get another backup node in Europe or something like that.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So, okay, so. I'm going to dive into Tendermint. So Tendermint is what's used in the Cosmos ecosystem and many other places. It's pretty cool. I'm starting with it because it's relatively easier to understand, and it's an example of the kind of continuous consensus game that plays one-shot consensus over and over and over in rounds. And so they basically play a little one-shot consensus at every single block height. And so here's how it works. I should also say that Tendermint does both block authoring and finality, and right now we're focusing on the finality part. So the authorship part is really easy. It's just like Aura. It's like if there's, Alice, Bob, Charlie, then their turns are just like Alice, Bob, Charlie, over and over forever. Like I said, it's naive but simple, and simple is good. Anybody can understand it. Grandpa, we're going to have to work a lot harder to understand. At the basic level, if the block has enough votes by the end of the slot, it's finalized, and otherwise it's rejected with the timeout. So in a slot, let's say it's my turn, I author my block, I gossip it around to all of you guys, you're all doing this voting thing, the time of the slot comes to an end, and if there's enough votes on it, like more than 2/3, then we finalize it. It's sometimes called instant finality in the sense that a block is finalized in the very same slot in which it's authored. That's true, but I would say that this is more marketing lingo than truth, and I think what it misses here is this. Authoring in a round-robin fashion is extremely simple. It's very easy, and sending out the blocks is just O of N. I author my block, I send it out to each one of you, or probably something smarter. I send it out to some of you, and then gossip takes it the rest of the way. But doing this finality voting is actually O of N squared. And so for the founders, what that means is it doesn't just get bigger as we get more peers, it gets bigger in a curved up way. So as we get more peers, it gets a lot bigger. And then we get more peers and it gets a hell of a lot bigger. And it keeps getting bigger at a bigger and bigger rate. So what that means is that if you want to have a reasonably decentralized, a reasonably large validator set, you start to have a lot of messaging overhead in your BFT-based finality layer. So when you do this instant finality thing, you're actually constraining the authoring mechanism, which could be very fast, O of N, to operate as slowly as the finality gadget does, which is O of N squared. Okay? And that's what they call instant finality. Slow it down to the speed of the slowest part and call it instant. Not a bad strategy. But there is actually something that's good about this. I'll bash on the term instant all day long, but there is actually something that's really nice about this method, and that's that you never have a blockchain fork. No forks in your Cosmos chain. Pretty darn cool in my opinion. And the reason is, if it's my turn to author, and I author a block, and it doesn't get finalized in time, we don't allow someone else to author a sibling block and still consider it and have to resolve the fork. When mine didn't get finalized in time, it's thrown away immediately. It's like it never happened. We orphan it off right away. and then we go on to the next authority and they try again to make a new block at that same slot. So again, I'm hating on the word instant, that's marketing, but the best thing about Tendermint is you never have to worry about a fork. How awesome. No fork choice heuristic, no worry about reorgs. So I would say this is what they should market in my opinion. All right, so, oh, yeah, Boda.
Yeah. So is it n squared or exponential? Because
Oh, n squared, O of n squared.
It's n squared.
Yep.
It's not every node talks to every.
It's because there's 2 rounds of voting is the idea. So let's go into it. Yeah, did your hand up? Throw that over there.
So if it's round robin for the leader election, how do they prevent denial of service attacks?
I mean, with networking layer, like, you know, firewalls and stuff, it's not robust against that. It's not what Andrew called a blind leader election. So it's weakened that way. Same as Aura. And yeah, and by the way, like, it doesn't have to be Aura. You could do something better like Sassafras, actually. But the important thing is it has to be single leader election. You can't have 2 people authoring a block in the same slot, or else then you'd have like, maybe they'd both get finalized. That would be a mess. So you couldn't do like Babe or proof of work or something like that, but you could do something a little better than Aura. Yeah, throw it over here.
Just in terms of like semantics implementation, I think Tendermint or Cosmos has like a limit of like 200 or 300 validators, right?
Yeah, because of the messaging overhead.
Right.
Yep,
But
exactly right.
Isn't it that like even Ethereum or most L1s, L2s also have like a limited validator set at the end, right? It's
There's
like
always a
committee.
bound,
Yeah,
absolutely.
there's
and
like
it's
committee,
always
right?
this. This is always the bound.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just that if you do it a little smarter than this, you can make the bound quite a bit. I mean, Ethereum has like thousands of validators.
Right, and that's because of the signature aggregation scheme, essentially, right? Like you have to send multiple messages across.
Yep,
it.
and
Okay.
you have to sometimes send messages and then get messages back.
Got it.
Yeah,
All right. Thank you.
exactly right. So it's always, so yeah, this is actually a good point to dig in. And even if we don't dive exactly into who sends messages where and everything, it's messaging overhead is what makes Finality slow. The more people that you're trying to reach agreement with, the more people you have to talk with and network with and see if you're all on the same page. And it works exactly the same way in the formal models as it does in the squishy, like, hey, let's all talk to each other and decide what to do tomorrow way. Okay, so we're going to look at Tendermint now in a little bit more technical detail. So step 1, you just wait for a block, or like if it's my slot, then I author the block and send it around. So as soon as you see a block in the slot, then you go on to step 2, which is that you pre-vote. So if the block is valid, you like run the state machine and everything, and if the block is valid, then you pre-vote for it. You say like I pre-vote to finalize this block. So pre-vote is the first round of voting. This is a 2 rounds of voting protocol. 2 rounds of voting is what came from that Liskov and whoever. That's the practical Byzantine fault tolerance solution. So then the other thing is, if the block is invalid, then you pre-vote nil. I don't want to finalize this block. Those are the only things you can vote. Finalize it or don't finalize it. That's the first round of voting. And so, and by the way, I'm talking all about casting your vote, but implicitly the other thing that you're doing is listening to everybody else's votes and keeping, tallying them up yourself. Okay, so here comes the next round. It's called pre-commit. Seems funny that it always has, pre still, even though this is the second round, but this naming is deep in the literature at this point. So you wait until you've seen 2/3 of pre-votes, so 2/3 of the votes from the first round, and if you see 2/3 of the votes from the first round saying, hey, I think that this block is good and valid, I'd like to finalize it, then you then you pre-commit again for the block. You say, I still want to finalize it. At first, what you're saying is, I personally have checked this block and I want to finalize it. And in the second time, what you're saying is, I've counted the votes of my peers and there are enough that I still want to finalize it. So the first one is all about your own personal opinion. The second one is your reflection on what the community has said. And then if you don't get enough pre-votes, then you pre-commit nil. You say, all right, I don't want to finalize this one. So it's possible that you could say in the first round, I vote for this block. I checked it. I think it's good. I'd like to finalize it. And then you wait and wait and wait. And enough of your peers didn't make that same vote. And so you say, okay, well, even though I wanted to finalize it, I'm now changing my mind because I haven't seen enough of my peers vote on this thing. So now I don't want to finalize it anymore. Yeah.
Do you know exactly how many nodes are in the network to know how much is 2/3 of them?
Yeah, you do, and you have to. There was that point about you have to have a finite authority set. Yep, and this is why. Because if this was like Nakamoto consensus, I don't even know how many miners there are, so I don't even know what 2/3 is. That's exactly right.
Yeah, it was the same question. So it's the open network and people can anytime join. So, and 2/3 can be different for different nodes, depending upon how many peers they see.
So when you're dealing with one of these PBFT-based finality gadgets, it's not open and permissionless in the same naive way that proof of work is. In proof of work, it's very directly permissionless, right? Turn on your computer, you're mining, that's it. Here, at the PBFT level, it's not permissionless at all, right? There's a set of authorities and they do it. The way that we make it permissionless is that we say, okay, for the first 10 blocks, it's going to be these authorities. And in the meantime, we're going to run the decentralized election for who the next authorities are. So the way that you can sort of permissionlessly join is to come in and join the election and let people vote for you and then get in eventually. So we take away the direct permissionlessness of Nakamoto consensus in exchange for stronger mathematical guarantees about finality. And then we try to restore the permissionlessness as much as we can with some kind of like staking game. Was there a hand? Oh, yeah, okay, yes, all right, great. Okay, so we're almost done. We're right in the middle of tendermint. We authored a block. We voted to validate it, finalize it. We saw enough other people vote to finalize it. And so finally, we complete the round, and we either finalize it or we don't. So if we see 2/3 of the pre-commits, that's the round 2 votes, saying to finalize it, then we ultimately do. So there's one more fail path here. You know, you can go and in the first round say, I validated it. I would like to finalize it. And then you can say, I've seen enough of my other peers say that they'd also like to finalize it, and I still want to finalize it. But then in the end, you didn't see enough peers make that second step, and so we still have to throw it away. So the idea is if you can see a 2/3 threshold in both rounds of voting, then the block gets finalized. Otherwise, it's thrown away forever. There's no chance to finalize it later. There's no chance to build on it. It's just gone. We'll build another one at this height next time.
One thing can I say?
Here. Yeah. Well, wait, who is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So here we are kind of proving that 2/3 of the voting is kind of BFT.
Yeah.
And in other cases, we see in the Bitcoin also and in the BAVE also, I think 51% of the majority.
Yeah.
So do you think 51% is as BFT as this? I mean,
well, the threshold's certainly different, right? Yeah, you
so
identified that correctly.
Guarantee is same.
What's that?
Guarantee of the correctness.
You're talking about like how high quality the block space is? Can I be equally sure that it's going to be finalized, or? Because like, so I understand, like in Bitcoin, you need 50% of the people to go evil, statistically speaking, before you have a problem. Here, you only need 34%. There is a thing called a 34% attack in most like PBFT systems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so in that sense, the threshold's lower, right? Yeah, you can't help but notice. Yeah. Throw that mic backwards.
I have a question about time here. So here in some bullet points, you have the concept of wait for. It's, I assume, a bounded amount of time. So what happens in those edge cases, like when some are waiting and then it's an edge case, it's about like to expire or whatever, and like they change their opinion, but for another node, because like the clock is slightly skewed, they accept it within the bound.
That's a great question. I don't know how that works out. I know for sure it's handled, but yeah, the way you asked it is very good and not wrapping my head around it right now. So let me just repeat it back. So the idea is like, let's say we're going through this process, you know, all the pre-votes are coming in, looking good. The pre-commits are coming in, looking good, but the, you know, time's running tight. We're getting near the end of the slot. I'm up to like, you know, 50%, 60%, 65%. We're almost out of time. And then just in the nick of time, I see enough votes and finalize it. But maybe you have just a tiny bit more network latency and you say, we just missed it, and don't finalize it. Yeah, for sure that's got to be handled, and it's not immediately clear to me right now, but let's follow up on that one. Oh yeah, and there's this link to this blog post, which is really awesome. And oh wait, I want to just show you the figure from the blog post. It's this one. Yeah, so I'll post this in Discord. Well, it's on the slide, so you can find it already. But this is just like a graphical representation of exactly how Tendermint works. It explains the same stuff that I did just now. So feel free to study from that one. Okay, so I want to introduce this concept of hybrid consensus, okay? What hybrid consensus means is separating the authoring mechanism from the finality gadget. So we've sort of taught this whole module under the guise of hybrid consensus. Like Andrew had a whole lesson on authoring, and now I have a whole separate lesson on finality. So we're like very squarely into the hybrid consensus worldview, like here in the Polkadot ecosystem. And not so much like in Tendermint or proof of work. Those kind of tie the block authoring together with the finality. So this is the abstract of the Grandpa paper, and the Grandpa paper basically introduces two things. First is the idea of hybrid consensus, separating the authoring from the finality, and second is Grandpa itself, a particular finality gadget to use. And this is what's, this is how Substrate works. It's all about the hybrid consensus. And so this, I would say this is the crux of it right here. Block production stays live even if finality lags. If we're struggling to finalize blocks, maybe because people are offline or because latency is getting high or something, we can still be authoring blocks and sort of optimistically adding to our shared story in hopes that we'll come back and finalize it later. Now, if we were using Tendermint, that would be a crazy thing to do, to keep authoring the chain longer, hoping we finalize it later, knowing that finality takes longer than authoring. We could never do that, right? We would be getting a bigger and bigger gap the whole time. But here's the real thing that we do. It allows lower overhead in the finality layer by not tying it up into the authoring layer. So what we do is, instead of finalizing each block individually at each height, instead we're voting on chains. So you vote on the very best block you know, and implicitly that's a vote for all of its ancestors as well. And then in each round you finalize the best block you possibly can. So in the early days of Kusama, there were still some bugs in the Grandpa code, not in the protocol's square, but the code didn't quite implement it correctly. And finality stalled. And I think one of the biggest ones was like a couple hours long. And eventually they kind of, fixed the bug and upgraded the nodes and everything. Meanwhile, we've got like hours worth of unfinalized blocks already up there. But because Grandpa allows voting on entire chains, not just blocks, you get to finalize up to the tip almost immediately as soon as Grandpa comes back online. And so that's the beauty of this approach, right? You get to stay optimistically producing blocks. You don't have to have finality take forever, but the cost is you have forks and you have reorgs, and none of that exists in Tendermint. Yeah, Boda again.
But doesn't that mean that we can get an invalid blocks in between?
So you mean like in terms of the state machine?
Yeah.
No. You're still checking all of that. So like, let's say finality has stalled, but people are still authoring blocks. When you import a block, you're still like checking that the right person authored it and that all the state transitions are valid and stuff like that. And if it's not, you reject it just like normal. Yeah. Right in front. Yeah.
So if the blocks are keep authoring and these things still happening. So if you take a payments use case, for example, so if I paid you and the finality lagged for somehow, I know like it happened I know it happened for one time, but if the finality lagged and it was a payment solution, so.
A payment solution. Yeah, you're trying to sell me my car, or your car, I've paid you, but it's not finalized yet. Yeah, that sucks. It sucks. That's all you can say about it. You hope finality comes back, right? Yeah. And it sucks more than in proof of work, because in proof of work, as more blocks are rolling by, you're at least more and more and more sure, and eventually you'll be like, all right, there's a 0.5% chance this is going to reorg, like just take my car, I got to get out of here. But when you have deterministic finality, that's all you have. There's no notion of probably not going to be reverted, right? It's just not finalized. It's Boolean false. So you really have to wait for the finality to come back.
And the reorg would be very bigger reorg, right?
Well, it's potential that you can have a bigger basically you can have a reorg as deep as until the last finalized block. So the longer finality is stalled, the longer the unfinalized part grows, the deeper the reorg can be. When finality is working good, like it almost is always these days, it just lags 2 or 3 blocks behind or something like that.
And last question, if the finality has happened to block number, let's say X, so the possibilities of reorg or the possibilities of having the data still to reorg in future, we can flush that data, right?
What was the last part?
So we can flush the data for the block before the finality has happened.
Oh yeah, like pruning
Yeah.
blocks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, that's exactly right. You can prune them because you know you don't have to reorg.
Yeah. Okay.
Except if the assumptions are violated. Remember, that's always possible. Okay, I see you, Boda, but I want to do just a little bit more before we go on. Yeah, I pretty much already talked through the reorg, so great job leading the conversation. Oh yeah, and here's the diagram for what I was just explaining to you. Like, if this is the network that I see, I don't reorg to the longest chain here. You'll never reorg away from a finalized block, right? So we're only going to consider forks that extend the latest finalized one from here. So it helps simplify reorgs.
And we can
quite a
prune
bit.
the below chain.
And you can prune. Yep. Okay, before I go to Grandpa, now's a good time. Boda, do you have a question still?
Do I have a flag or something to know that this is the block that was finalized? So that if I paid someone, like,
So as a blockchain node, you're listening to the Grandpa protocol, you're listening to all these votes come in, or let's say Tendermint, or let's say Grandpa, you're listening to the Grandpa votes come in, and when you see there's, okay, 2/3 votes, you just like note in your database, you have a block database, right? Like here's the block ID, here's its header, here's its body, here's its state, whatever. There's just another column in that like, database, and you just check off like this one's finalized. Yep. So it's something that Finality is something that each node stores locally off chain, but because of the guarantees, we know that each node is storing the same values, unless they're Byzantine. Okay, yeah, so let's do Grandpa. Deterministic finality only. So Tendermint was deterministic finality and block authoring. Grandpa is deterministic finality only, and that's not a weakness, that's a strength. That means you can marry it up with any blocks authoring or leader election mechanism that you want. Oh yeah, like I said, it requires, and you have to, it needs one. And if you want Grandpa to be live, you need your block authoring mechanism to have a liveness proof too, right? Grandpa's awesome, but it can't finalize blocks if you're not even authoring blocks. No system can do that. It's a lot like Tendermint, but better in the ways that I specifically mentioned. It's all, this is a little shilly. It's also weaker in the other ways that I already mentioned. You don't want to publish that on the internet. And so, like I said, Grandpa finalizes chains and not individual blocks. And what I mean by that is you vote for some block, but it implicitly votes for all of its ancestors. So here's a diagram that shows it actually. So these blocks here are already finalized. If we have a long chain, there's going to be a whole long part that's not interesting. It looks just like that linear thing from my slides earlier. And then we're doing some Grandpa voting right here. So just like Tendermint, there's 2 rounds of votes. We'll just say this is the second round because we're about to finalize. So we've got 7 validators, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they're all going to vote for whatever they think the best block is. Now, this one's finalized already, so if there's any kind of forks back here or whatever, they better not be voting for that. That would be slashable, basically. And so, we see where they vote, right? 1 voted here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. But they also all implicitly vote for their ancestors. And so, so there's how many validators? 7. So we need at least 2/3. So what's 2/3 of 7? 5, I guess, right? Wait, is that right? Or 4? No, 4 is not enough, is it? 4 out of 6 is 2/3, so it needs to be 5. Yeah, it needs to be 5. So, okay, so how many nodes are voting for this block? That's an easy one. 2. How many are voting here? Also 2. Here's a harder question. How many are voting here? Yeah, 4. Bingo, that's right, because these 2 are also voting for that one. And then over here, when we get to this one, now we have 6 votes because we also have these ones. Now, this person was on a different chain. They didn't vote for that, but that's okay because we already have enough that we can finalize that. And so in 1 round of voting here, we were able to finalize 3 new blocks. We didn't have to go through one at a time. Okay, here it is. You guys ready? We're diving into deep to the Grandpa protocol. We're going to play a game on the whiteboards after this, by the way, that's going to really help you get this. And just remember Tendermint. This is all they're both based on PBFT. So even though this is a little more complex, the 2 rounds of voting and voting for whatever you saw your peers vote for, that stuff all applies. So we start out that each validator broadcasts a pre-vote for the highest block that it thinks should be finalized. In Tendermint, it was a little different. It was either you vote that this block should be finalized or not. In Grandpa, you're voting which block should be finalized. And basically that means like the best block you know of. So for honest validators, the block must include the chain that was previously finalized. Hopefully that's clear. You can't finalize like a different fork. That would be a safety violation. And the new chain can be several blocks longer. Okay, I said all of this stuff. Okay. All right, so here we go. Here's some blockchain, okay? Genesis is way up top somewhere. We're building downwards, and then we've got a little bit of a fork here, and the blue ones are the finalized ones. So we'll do 7 validators again, just like in my previous. So the first thing that we do is each of our validators casts some pre-votes. Now there are 7 validators, and we don't see all of their votes yet in this diagram. Maybe they're still going to come, or maybe those people are offline, or maybe they're malicious, but we do at least see 5 votes there. All right, each validator computes the highest block that can be finalized based on the set of pre-votes. So that just means we're looking for a 2/3 majority, just like we were before. And we call this thing the pre-vote ghost. Oh, whoops. Oh, hold on, I lost my... Oh yeah, there we go. So we marked our pre-vote ghost here, okay? It can't be this one, we only have 3 votes here. It can be this one because we have 5 votes, okay? Now we might get more votes in later still. We might get a vote in over here, we might get another one here, but that's okay. We marked our pre-vote ghost right here. Okay, we define the round estimate as the highest ancestor of the pre-vote ghost for which it's still possible to pre-commit. And basically the thing to remember is that when you're first starting out, if you haven't seen any pre-commits yet, then you just set the estimate equal to the pre-vote ghost. When we're playing on the whiteboard, this is basically what's going to always happen. You're going to set it equal. But the edge case that it's getting at is it might be that by the time you're able to start wondering, like, where's the pre-vote ghost and where's the estimate, you may have already seen second round votes from other validators, pre-commits from other validators. And if that's the case, then you would just have to put this thing a little bit higher. All right, if the estimate extends the last finalized chain, then each validator will cast a pre-commit for that chain. It does here. Our last finalized chain is just those blue ones, so we're extending it by 2 blocks in this case. So you wait to receive enough pre-commits, just like we did in Tendermint. We again find the common ancestor of the estimate, which has threshold pre-commits, and we declare that block is finalized. Okay, so here's our pre-commits coming in. This time we have 5 votes right here and 1 vote up here. Oh yeah, sorry. Right, yeah, good catch. So we have 4 here and 1 here. So when they flow up, we get a total of 5 right here. Nice catch, guys. So it might almost seem like we should finalize this one, right? Like, look how many people voted for it. Not 2/3, so don't finalize it. So we only got to finalize 1 that time. Oh, and I should say, I'm singing all the praises about how you can finalize multiple blocks per round. You can also finalize 1, or you can even finalize none. If the authoring liveness goes down, for example, or if a lot of people aren't voting, sometimes you don't finalize anything in a round. Also totally fine. Is your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
Why didn't we finalize? Can you go back 2 slides? One more?
This one?
Like the previous one with 3 and 2. Yes, this one. Why didn't we finalize? See, so we have.
This is only the first round of voting. We have 2 rounds of voting to complete. These are the pre-votes. You never finalize on the pre-votes. So you're saying all right, we already figured out that this was the pre-vote ghost and the estimate. We know that the protocol says we should vote here. We did. Is this person Byzantine? Well, remember, not everyone will have identified the same pre-vote ghost that we did. So let's go back over here. We've only seen 5 votes here, okay? It's possible that there's 2 votes for this block that we haven't seen, but some other validator has seen. And then it's possible that maybe they haven't seen these votes or something like that. So maybe their pre-vote ghost is here, so that's the best they can do for their pre-commit. And the beautiful thing about that is that even though that node that saw these votes is kind of farther behind than us, we can still work with them to finalize as much as we can. That's because our votes flow up. Oh, okay. Where did we leave off? I think right here. Okay, so let's talk about completable. If the estimate is lower than the pre-vote ghost, or if it's impossible to have a supermajority on any block higher than the current estimate, the validators start a new round after it becomes complete. Oh, that's the definition of completable.
Question.
Hold on a second. Let me see if I'm how much of this is coming back to me. Oh, this is something cool. So we see another pre-commit here, and now we have 5 on this block, and so now we can actually finalize this one in the same round. So at some point in the round, we noticed that this thing got finalized, and then we saw another pre-commit come in, and now we can finalize this one. So let's go back to this slide. If the estimate is lower than the pre-vote ghost, that's not the case. Our estimate and pre-vote ghost are the same. Or if it's impossible to have a supermajority on any block higher than the current estimate. So here's our current estimate, and we will never have a supermajority on any block higher than that, because look, pretty much all of our votes are up here. Certainly most of them are. The most we can ever get is 2 more down here. And so that's how we say this round is completable. Okay, yep, go ahead.
So what happens if they voted like for the left branch 3 validators and for the right one 4? Like they would still agree that the intersection, the one is blue or whatever.
Yeah.
They would agree, but how would they continue finalizing after the fork?
So Grandpa is played in rounds, just like
Yeah.
Tendermint. What's different is that the Grandpa rounds aren't tied to the authoring slots.
Mm-hmm.
So in this round that you just described, there's votes here and here, we finalize this thing.
Yeah.
At some time, this round comes to an end,
Mhm.
and we erase all of these
Yeah.
votes, and we erase our estimate, and we
Yeah.
play another round of Grandpa. And maybe by that time, whoever voted over here has now seen this block, and so next time they'll vote over here.
So why would they change their opinion?
Maybe the first time they hadn't seen either of these blocks. They just voted for the longest chain they knew of.
Oh, so they still vote for the longest one, they think.
You always vote for the longest chain that you know of.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So if someone's voting, our view included this, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's voting over here, that means they either have a different view or they're malicious. Yeah, throw that. Oh, there's one right behind you.
Yeah, I just want to understand a little bit of the context of how this happens, because I guess for new block authoring, that's like every 6 seconds or something, but finality can actually lag. So, and if everybody is casting their votes at the same time, I guess over time they may change what they see as the finalized vote. Does this happen in rounds?
Yeah, yep, exactly, in rounds. So it's possible that people see a lot of different tips, the votes come in, there's not really consensus yet, we don't finalize anything, and then the next round, maybe more blocks everybody has a more complete view, some of us see a new longer chain, change our minds, we're able to finalize something.
But how do you, is there a fixed time, like the block
Yeah,
time?
the Grandpa rounds have a particular period to them, yep, just like the 6 seconds for the authoring that you said.
I do have a question.
Okay.
So following up on that, I think in the previous example we mentioned that, for example, for this round, that the right one has the longest, right? And then maybe people then vote on that.
Okay.
And then it gets finalized. But in the previous lecture, we did mention that maybe sometime later, the left one get enough, and then, it's actually the longest chain. That should be the one that we should choose.
So this is the difference when you add a deterministic finality gadget. Once you add a finality gadget, it's no longer just the longest chain rule. Like if you want to, the closest thing to the longest chain rule is longest chain of the most recently finalized block. That's the whole point of the finality gadget. So now let's say later on we get enough votes or whatever, we finalize this one. Actually, that's my next slide. So let's just do it. So then let's say the next thing we see is boom, 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 10 more blocks from here. We're not reorging to that. Our fork choice rule is no longer just longest chain. It's longest chain from here. That's what finality is. Yeah, good question. Okay, so we'll do a quick alternate ending, and I think this will all make a whole lot more sense when we play it out on the whiteboard. So the alternate ending is that instead of getting another vote up here, we this time got the vote up here. And another vote up there. And now the estimate moves up, and that's the end. That's the best thing that we can finalize. So if you remember, the 2 conditions for completing the round were if the estimate is lower than the pre-vote ghost. That's what happened in our alternate ending. Or if it's impossible to have a supermajority for any block higher than the current estimate. That's what happened in our first ending. Oops. All right, I'm gonna leave that up there to soak in. I think we should go get a water or a coffee break or whatever. And yeah. So hopefully after you come back, then we'll have time to play the whiteboard one before our guest speaker from PolyU shows up. Thanks a lot, guys.